vSHIELD zones. This is a really cool product that was introduced with vSphere 4, and it introduces or it plugs a significant gap that was previously available in a virtual infrastructure. And that gap was the fact that VMware virtualizes the access layer. So prior to vSHIELD zones, there was no way for a security administrator to have any kind of visibility yet control over any kind of traffic that was flowing from a virtual machine to a virtual machine or among a virtual machine. So that posed a significant problem. So with the introduction of vSHIELD zones, what VMware did is they gave you the ability, they gave you some tools in order for you to view and monitor the traffic that's flowing between virtual machines through virtual switches. Now the way that VMware virtualized the access layer is through virtual switches and vNetwork distributed switches, etc. So what vSHIELD zones does is it creates a type of a VMware or a VM firewall. So it allows you to create rules, what you can access, what you can't. It allows you to go down to not just source destination IP addresses, you can also block at the port level, whether it's TCP or UDP, and have that sort of granularity as far as rules are concerned. So think about it as a traditional physical firewall, except this is a firewall that is completely dedicated for your virtual machines. Now there are two components to vSHIELD zones. There's the vSHIELD manager and there's the vSHIELD appliance. Now the vSHIELD manager, think of this as the centralized management server. It controls all the other appliances that are deployed inside of your virtual infrastructure in order to apply or enforce the rules that you set at the vSHIELD manager level. Now vSHIELD manager is deployed via an OVF. You download this from VMware, and we'll show you during the actual on-screen instructions how to install and configure this. It's also accessed via a web interface after it's been installed and configured. Now the second component is vSHIELD appliances. Now the vSHIELD appliances are the actual appliances that do the hard labor. Those are the appliances that you deploy on your ESX servers as virtual machines, and their sole purpose is to perform traffic inspection. They also enforce any kind of rules that are applied from the vSHIELD manager. Now you'll need a virtual or a vSHIELD appliance for every ESX or ESXi host that you have. Now every ESX or ESXi host might have multiple standard virtual switches or VDS switches. So if you have more than one virtual switch with virtual machines on there that you want to protect, you're going to need a virtual appliance or a vSHIELD appliance for every one of those virtual switches. Now as we go through the on-screen instructions, there's a couple of prerequisites that you need to create in order for the vSHIELD appliance to install properly. We're going to need you to create 3 port groups on the virtual switch that you want to protect. The 3 port groups are going to be VSM management, stands for VS or vSHIELD management, protected and unprotected. Now all 3 need to be just virtual machine port groups, nothing too fancy. During the deployment and configuration of the vSHIELD appliances, it's going to detect that these 3 port groups are available, and it's going to use them as part of the configuration. So the VS management port group is used for the vSHIELD appliance, the vSHIELD manager communication. So that's the port group by which they communicate, and the vSHIELD manager is able to pass on commands. The protected port group is going to be used for any virtual machines that are going to need to be protected using the vSHIELD appliances, and the unprotected, as its name implies, is a port group that is going to be used for any virtual machines that you don't want to be protected by vSHIELD appliance. Okay, now enough with the theory, enough with the lecture. Let's jump into the vSphere client and see how we can install and configure the vSHIELD manager, the vSHIELD appliances, and protect some virtual machines and create some VMwall rules. Let's go through the installation of vSHIELD Zones Manager. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you want to make sure you've downloaded the OVF file somewhere on your Virtual Center server in order for you to install it through Virtual Center. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up here to File, and this is kind of the same procedure we used when we installed the Nexus 1000V. We're going to come down here to Deploy OVF. And we're going to select, I've downloaded here to my local machine, so I'm going to select the OVF template here. We're going to click on Next. It's just going to give you a basic summary of the version, how much space it needs, etc., etc. Accept the license agreement. And I'm going to call this exactly what it is. I'm going to remove the space here, vSHIELD Manager. I'm going to select the ESX host I want this to install on. Now obviously again, if you had multiple ESX hosts, they would show up there. I'm going to keep it in that cluster. We're going to select the following storage. You can feel free to go through the summary. When you're ready, we're going to click on Finish. And again, same process. It's going to take anywhere between a couple of seconds to a couple of minutes, depending on the network performance, ESX performance, or on your host or network. So now, once the OVF has been deployed, the first thing we want to do is we want to configure the network settings. We need to configure the TCP stack for this VM before we can connect to it and start configuring it and configuring vSHIELD Manager. So VMware has provided us with an easy way to configure the IP stack, and it's pretty simple. All you need to do is power on this new virtual machine, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Control-Shift-H so I can move back to the hosts and clusters, and you'll see that the VM is over here. We're going to power that VM on. And once it's powered on, what we're going to do is we're going to open the console, because it gives us a command that we can put into the console of the VM that allows us to configure the IP stack. Once we're at a command prompt that we can log in, we're going to actually log in with the user admin. And the password is just default. And voila. Once we get the command prompt here, we're going to type in setup and we're going to hit enter. And this allows us to configure the IP stack. Now for an IP address, what I'm going to give this thing is 10.12.112.195 and a subnet mask of 0, default gateway of 10.12.112.1. And yes, we want to save these changes. And voila. At this point, what we're going to do is we're going to launch a web browser and connect to vSHIELD Manager on the IP configuration or on the IP stack that we just configured. Alright, we're going to close the console here. We're going to open a browser and we are going to navigate to the IP address that we just configured for the vSHIELD Manager. We're going to log in with admin, and default is our password, and voila. In a few seconds here, it's going to prompt us to give the information for a virtual center. So what we're going to do is we're going to give it or provide the information necessary for it to connect to virtual center, so it can give us the inventory of hosts and clusters, the networks, etc. I'm going to do 112.151. A username with administrative rights. This allows it to enumerate a virtual center. And voila. It has enumerated our instance of virtual center. As you can see, this is my data center. This is the host that we have configured in it, some of the virtual machines, some of the resource pools, etc. Now, a couple of things I failed to mention real quick here when we started this. As you can notice, we connected over HTTPS. Now, all I did was I had to put in the IP address of vSHIELD Manager, and it automatically redirected me to HTTPS. So even though I didn't have to specifically use HTTPS, it was able to redirect it. So that's one thing. The other thing is I went ahead and put the IP address of virtual center here. If you wanted to use the host name, you obviously want to pre-configure the host name inside a DNS or inside of a host file so that it knows how to resolve it. Okay, now the last step that we need to do in order for us to finish the configuration of the vSHIELD Manager is we need to register the vSphere plugin. So you're going to scroll all the way to the right here and click on vSphere plugin, and we're going to click on register. Now if you wanted to unregister it, now obviously you'd come back to this web page and you'd click on unregister. Since this is the first time we do this, we're going to accept the security warning, or we're going to ignore it actually. And as you can see here, it says register plugin operation successful on the following virtual center host, and gives us the IP address. Alright, now this would conclude the setup of the vSHIELD Manager. Now the next step would be to deploy some of the vSHIELD appliances that would serve as our VM wall, if we can call it, to protect or to start monitoring the traffic that our virtual machines exchange back and forth. Now that we have the vSHIELD Manager deployed and configured properly, let's go ahead and deploy the vSHIELD appliances. And to do that, we're going to switch back to the vSphere client here, and we're going to follow the same process. We need to deploy an OVF file in order to deploy the appliance. So I'm going to go up here to File, Deploy OVF, And since I have it pre-configured, I've done the exercise a few times before this, so I have it selected here. I'm going to click on next. You can feel free to read through the version, etc. Accept the license agreement. And I'm going to call this vSHIELD 01. Actually, let's call this vSHIELD underscore template, since we are going to convert this into a template. Whoops, if I could type. Next, I'm going to keep it at the default here. I'm going to select the second storage. And we get to this screen. Now, during the lecture, I mentioned to you that you need to pre-configure 3 networks for the vSHIELD appliance: the VS management, the protected, and the unprotected. Now, I've done this already in preparation of this, and I'll show you after the deployment where I've done this. And this is why it prompts you, because it recognizes that they are available, so it knows how to communicate with them. So we're going to click on next, go through the summary, finish, and voila. Now it's going to take a few minutes or a few seconds again to deploy this virtual machine. As soon as the virtual machine is done, I'm going to take this and convert it into a template. And the reason we're going to convert it into a template is because you need a vSHIELD appliance for every ESX host that has virtual machines you intend on protecting. You're going to need a virtual appliance. You're also going to need a virtual appliance if you have multiple virtual switches. So you can see how you're going to need to probably deploy multiple vSHIELD appliances, and thereby the use of a template makes the rapid provisioning of these appliances much quicker. So I'm going to click on close here since it's deployed, and then I'm going to take the vSHIELD template virtual machine, scroll down to template, and we're going to convert this into a template. And voila. Now before we move on, I'm going to take you to the host configuration here. We're going to go into networking, and there it is. And you'll notice that I've already pre-created these port groups that are required: the VS management, the protected, and the unprotected. Now for your environment, you obviously want to select the proper VLANs that correlate for the necessary traffic. Okay, now that we've created the template, what we need to do is we need to deploy the virtual appliance to any ESX or ESXi host that has virtual machines we want to protect. So we're going to switch back to the browser, the vSHIELD Manager browser here. We're going to select an ESX or ESXi host from the inventory. And on the right here, we're going to click on Install vSHIELD. We're going to click on the Configure Install Parameters. Now, in the Select Template to Clone here, we're going to select the template that we want. In this case, we have one template. That's the one that we convert. That's the vSHIELD appliance that we converted into a template. It comes in handy here because you can use it easier. Now, we're also going to select the data store where we want to store this in. So I'm going to just select the first one. We're going to enter a name for this, and I'm going to call this one vSHIELD 01. Now we're going to specify an IP address for this vSHIELD VM instance, so I'm going to give it 10.12.112.197. I believe that's open. We're going to give it also a subnet mask and a default gateway. Now, if there's any VLAN ID associated with that, you can feel free to enter it here. This would be the right time to do so. Now, if you wanted to specify a secure key here, the secure key is optional, and it's used for securing the communication between the vSHIELD Manager and the vSHIELD appliances. For the purposes of this demo, I'm just going to leave it blank, and we're going to push forward with the installation. Okay, now the last step we want to do is we want to select the virtual switch that we want to protect. Now from the drop-down menu here, you can select either vSwitch 0 or vSwitch 1. Since most of my VMs are on vSwitch 1, I'm going to select that. And you'll notice here that's giving you a description of the available virtual switches that you have, what types of VLANs are on them, etc., etc., the VM NICs that are associated with them, and it's telling you that this is a candidate for vSHIELD protection. Now we're going to click on Continue. It's fetching the information, and it gives you this cool graph. You can review all of the necessary information. Now it's obviously giving you all the install steps that are going to happen. We're going to click on Install here. Alright, once the GUI or the wizard setup is complete, then let's go back into the vSphere client and take a look at the changes that were made on the networking side of things. So you're going to notice here that it made a clone of the virtual switch that we opted to protect. So we now have another virtual switch called vSwitch1_VS, which protects this virtual switch. And as you'll notice, it moved all the VLANs that had virtual machines in them into this protected virtual switch, and you'll notice that this virtual switch has no physical adapters. So all the communication is now going to go through the vSHIELD appliance or agent, so on and so forth. This is how it's going to protect it, and like I said before, it's going to do this on a virtual switch basis. So if you have more than one virtual switch, you're going to have to do this process for each one of them, deploying a virtual appliance to each. There's one thing that I want to draw your attention to. Does anybody have a problem with the figure that I'm showing on screen right now? Do you see any problem with some of the other features that have made ESX popular or vSphere popular? We now have virtual machines that are part of a virtual switch that has no NICs. How are we going to do vMotion? How are we going to do distributed resource scheduler? Well, the answer is, if you do this, vMotion will be disabled automatically. You wouldn't be able to initiate a vMotion manually, and distributed resource schedule won't be able to automatically do any kind of vMotion. Now, the way to get around that is we have to modify a file in order to tell it that basically you need to allow vMotion in a vSHIELD zones model. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to navigate to a file called vpxxd.cfg, which can be located on the local C drive, Documents and Settings. We're going to go to All Users. We're going to go to Application Data, VMware, and we're going to go into VMware Virtual Center. And you'll notice that that file is over here. Now, what I would recommend is that you open this file with WordPad. Once opened with WordPad, you need to add the following section to this file. And I'm going to highlight it for you. Now you need to add this section under the config, and I need you to add it at the same level as vpxd. Once you've added this to the section, you're going to go ahead and save. Once it's saved, you need to restart the Virtual Center server service, and then you should be able to do vMotions in a vSHIELD zones. So now let's go back into the web interface here, and let's take a look at how we're able to create VMwall rules. Now we're going to click on the tab VMwall here, and the first thing you're going to notice is a bunch of rules that look like, you know, what you would be used to as far as creating rules on a firewall, for example. So you can create layer 2, layer 3, or layer 4 type rules, and that means that it operates at a higher level than just source destination IP addresses, and it goes up to TCP or UDP port level. Now you're going to notice here that there are 3 types of rules. The highest most rule is the data center high precedence rules. Those are going to take effect over anything. And then right below that, on this line here, and even though it doesn't say it, this is known as the data center low precedence rules. Now we're creating these rules at the data center level here. Now had I had a cluster, if there was a cluster in here, you could create rules at the cluster level. Now one thing to note is that the data center high precedence rules will obviously take precedence over anything else, which means they'll take precedence over cluster. But the cluster rules will take precedence over the data center low precedence rules, which goes here. Now obviously the default rules are going to be preceded by all of the above. Now what we're going to do for the purposes of this example, there are 2 ways of creating rules. You can create it manually, as we're going to do in this example, or you can generate traffic reports through vSHIELD zones that tells you the type of traffic that's going through back and forth, and you can generate rules based on that in an automated fashion. I'll show you the reports in just a second. But for the purposes of this example, what we're going to do is we're going to try to block IRC traffic. Now IRC, as you guys know, Internet Relay Chat Protocol, so it's a very chatty protocol. Now in order to do that, we're going to do this up here. We're going to do it at the data center high precedence rules. We're going to click on add, and you'll notice that you're able to change every one of those fields. So the first thing we want to do is we want to change the source. I'm going to double click on that, and let's go ahead and do any for now. We're going to keep the source to any as well. Go ahead and double click on destination. Let's do any. Destination application I'm going to leave blank. As far as the destination port is concerned, I'm going to do 6667, which is the IRC port, and I'm going to choose TCP from this drop down here. And what we're going to do is, as far as an action is concerned, we want to deny this. Now as soon as I click on this checkbox, I'm going to get a box that tells me that be careful. What you're trying to do here is you're trying to monitor a port that is very chatty, so it's going to generate a lot of traffic that might affect performance. So I'm going to acknowledge this fact by clicking on OK. Now the final step here is going to be to click on commit so that the changes that I've made actually take effect. Do you want to commit these changes? Sure. And voila. Now, there's one thing to note here, and it's kind of simple, but I'm going to note it anyway. There's up or down, so that means you can take your rules up or down based on how you would want the precedence of these rules to take effect first. So if you want another rule to override or to be processed before the IRC rule that we just created, you can select that rule and click up, and that'll go up, so it'll be processed first. So what happens here is these rules are now acknowledged on the VM wall. What happens after this is these rules are now synchronized to all the vSHIELD appliances, and they are enforced. So every vSHIELD appliance is going to enforce this rule on the traffic going in and out, the traffic of the VMs that are that it's protecting. All right, now let's assume you didn't know what type of traffic you wanted to block, and you needed a way to find the type of traffic that you need and to automatically create a rule. Now we can do this as well in an easy way. So you have a tab here called VM Flow. If you click on VM Flow, it's going to generate reports on the type of traffic that's going in and out. So what we want to do is we want to drill into this report. You got some charts here. You can select the dates and time that you want to view this report through. But what I'm going to do here for the purpose of this example is I'm going to show the report. And now we're going to drill down into this report and figure out how we can take the information that's available to us in this report and generate a rule out of it. So I'm going to expand this. I'm going to expand UDP here. And I'm going to come down to outbound or outgoing, and then I'm going to expand categorized, go in here, I'm going to select, or we're going to expand this as well, and you'll notice that there's a radio button over here. So if I click on this radio button, this is the VMwall radio button, it's going to automatically understand that I want to add this rule. I'm going to go ahead and do that. It's pretty much letting us know that it's going to redirect us in order to add a rule. I'm going to click on OK. Voila. Now it's automatically added the traffic information or all the traffic criteria that you selected from the VM flow report here, and now it gives you the opportunity to manipulate this data, either deny it or keep it allowed. You want to log it, you want to commit, maybe you change your mind and you just don't want to go through with this exercise anymore. So this is another way how you can use VM flow to be able to analyze some of the traffic that's going back and forth through your links in order to make a better decision if you're unsure what type of traffic you're trying to block. So this brings us to the end of this lesson. I hope it's been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.